Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's planning control meeting. Can we all either please switch our mobiles off or put them on silent? And just to extend a welcome to our new member, Councillor Potter there. Okay, moving on. Apologies, anybody?
Chair, I've got apologies from Councillor Kerr.
Late items to be
also
introduced.
Apologies from Councillor Pegg.
Sorry?
Apologies from Councillor Pegg.
Okay. Late items to be introduced, there are none. Declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the last meeting held on 11th of May. Apparently there's two small amendments to that, and Stephen's going to tell us about that.
Thank you, Chair. Just two brief points. Two amendments. Chris Thorley, Traffic and Transport Engineer, was in attendance, and Councillor Evans did submit his apologies.
Thank you. Appeals decisions. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. As you'll see from the report, there are two. One's the formation of a vehicular access on Stenson Road. This property has access to the rear already, vehicular access, and the applicant sought parking provision at the front. The appeal was dismissed as the inspector agreed with us that the site has restricted visibility from the entrance on the front onto Stenson Road and inadequate on-site manoeuvring space. There's a TPO tree in the front garden, and we clearly didn't want to lose the TPO tree, and they cannot turn the car within the front of the property and exit in a forward gear. So it would have ended up reversing out onto Stenson Road, and for those of you who know it, Stenson Road is particularly busy. So the applicant lost his appeal, and the appeal was dismissed. He also tried to claim costs. That's that we were acting unreasonably in refusing his application, and the inspector said that there were no extra costs to work that he had to do. He had to do a tree survey because of the TPO tree. He had to do a visibility survey and speed, etc. for his application, but there were no extra costs necessary as a result of our refusal. So the costs were dismissed, as his appeal for costs were dismissed as well. So we won on both counts on that one. The other application I've got that was also dismissed was on Caxton Street, which was the former William Caxton Public House, where the applicant sought to create two new retail units in vacant space in the existing building for a hairdresser's and a hot food takeaway. Now, the two issues on this were vitality and viability of the existing centres, so the effect of those uses out of district centre and how they would affect the existing centres themselves, and also on the living conditions of nearby residents. The inspector felt that to allow the proposal would change a single shop into a small local shopping parade, which would be harmful to the vitality and viability of the defined centres in the area, so protecting those shopping centres, the shopping functions that we know. And on the second issue, the inspector felt that given the close relationship of the residential accommodation above and adjacent, he felt there was significant risk of the residents of the flats being subject to unacceptable levels of noise and vibration and fumes and odours arising from cooking from the A3 unit, the hot food unit. So that one was refused as well, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Good news on that. Coming to item 6, which is enforcement.
Chair, I have pleasure in bringing to members' attention the two lime trees that were felled on the Cavendish in June 2016. And we're here telling you about our success at the Magistrates' Court on the 11th of May, where the defendant, the person who was alleged to do the works or have the works done for him, he was found guilty, and on both charges of causing or permitting the carrying out of unauthorised works to two protected lime trees. The magistrates imposed a maximum fine for each offence, so it's £2,500 each offence, £5,000 fine for the works that were done, plus our costs, almost £2,000 of costs, total of nearly £7,000 worth of fine and a criminal conviction against the owner of the property. In summing up, the magistrates concluded that the defendant's evidence was inconsistent, lacked credibility, and there was a significant difference between his versions of events given during his taped recorded formal interview, and that's the one that Neil Jackson does under PACE conditions. So we interview people and we tape record the interview and present that as evidence. So he'd given evidence to Neil, and then he gave evidence on the day of his trial which were different. So he failed to substantiate his defence, and again we won, and the trees suffer unfortunately, but the punishment is there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Moving on to item 7, which is applications to be considered, and there is only one, which is the site of 10 Farley Road. And to tell us about that?
Thank you, Chair. Initially, just a few housekeeping matters. On page 5 of your report, under the heading Impact on the Amenity of Neighbours, for clarity, the site abuts the garden areas of number 2 and 2A Cathedral View and number 12 Farley Road to the north. And page 6 of your report, at the end of the second paragraph, the sentence should read, to prevent overlooking of the garden areas of number 2A Cathedral View and 8 Farley Road. Just to provide some background initially, in February 2015, planning permission was granted for the demolition of the existing house at number 10 Farley Road and the erection of a larger replacement dwelling. The variation application now before you seeks permission for a similar footprint of property. However, due to the fall in land levels to the rear of the site, the scheme as originally approved could not be implemented. Therefore, the applicant seeks to regularise the currently unauthorised structure on the site. The key changes to the scheme are 1, an increase in the finished floor levels of the building, and 2, the installation of a raised terrace area to the rear of the property, which had not been shown on the original plans. As a result of these changes, the main areas of concern relate to possible massing and overlooking of neighbouring properties, in particular 12 Farley Road and numbers 2 and 2A Cathedral View and number 8 Farley Road, which are to the north and to the south. To try and address the concerns, the applicant has agreed a number of revisions to the application which are shown on the amended plans and drawings. Initially, the raised terrace has been pulled away from the boundaries with number 2A Cathedral View and number 8 Farley Road, and a 2-metre high obscurely glazed panels have been added on both sides of the terrace. Secondly, obscure glazing is now proposed within the side-facing windows serving the family room and the dining room, which face towards 2A Cathedral View and 8 Farley Road. Thirdly, a smaller window opening is now proposed within the kitchen area on the rear elevation of the property. It's recommended that these openings remain obscurely glazed and fixed for the life of the development, which can be controlled through condition. For clarity, officers are also recommending some additional conditions as per the updates, which are that the property's permitted development rights for further extensions and alterations are removed by condition, and that a condition is included which controls any further changes to the land levels within the rear garden area. Also, to compensate for, sadly, the removal of some of the vegetation along the northern boundary, the applicant has submitted a planting scheme which, if they've confirmed, will be implemented prior to first occupation of the development. We're also recommending that this is controlled through condition. We've received 3 objections from neighbours plus representations from Nelson's solicitors. The issues raised include concerns about the scale and mass of the development, its visual appearance and overlooking, and issues are also raised about the unauthorised nature of the development. Whilst it is undoubtedly a larger development than previously on the site, taking into account the changes to the scheme, the development is considered to be tolerable in terms of its visual appearance and its impact on neighbour amenity. You've got 3 speakers on this application, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Right, our first speaker is Ms. Chapman from Nelson Solicitors. Good evening, Ms. Chapman. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Members, thank you for allowing me to address you this evening. It is felt that the report before you today is misleading in that it identifies the main changes in this application to be about a raised terrace and replacement tree planting, when ultimately this is about ground levels. It is also understood that 4 objections have been received about this application. The property is being built at a much higher level than that of Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald's property and garden. Both gardens sit at the same level. This committee granted permission for this property back in 2015, but it did not authorise it to be built at these levels, and now consent is being sought. Raising the ground levels means that the ground floor of this property sits practically level with the top of my client's 6-foot garden fence. The property is overbearing and will significantly impinge on their privacy, outlook, and enjoyment of their property. Building at this level is not the only option. When at the foundation stage, the applicant was encouraged by your officers to step down the property internally to address the impact on Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald, but to no avail. The fact that this property is substantially constructed does not prevent you from refusing this evening. The application also seeks approval for the addition of a raised terrace at the rear of the property with 2-metre-high glazed panelling. Contrary to the details in your report, the raised terrace actually starts at 2 metres above the former garden level, increasing to 2.5 metres. A raised terrace exacerbates the impact of the property on Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald. Again, the applicants have been encouraged by your officers to have stepped down from the property to reduce the impact of it, and again, this option has not been pursued. The raised terrace will remain open across the east elevation, giving Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald absolutely no privacy whatsoever when the occupants are sat out on the raised terrace looking directly into their property and the majority of their garden. Further, the 2-metre-high glazed panels at that level are oppressive, overbearing and stark in appearance. There will be an unsightly feature to neighbouring properties. They exacerbate the loss of outlook from Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald's rear lounge and dining area, and also give the feeling of enclosure, particularly from their patio. This is a further compromise being forced upon them. I urge you to take control of this situation this evening. Please refuse this application and ask your officers to take enforcement action imminently. Please give Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald some closure here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Chapman. We have Mr. Warriner. No? Okay. In that case, we'll have Councillor Hazelgrave then. Same rules apply, Councillor Hazelgrave.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, members of the committee, there are some serious issues which trouble me with regard to this application. The plans which were originally granted did not allow for elevation of the property by raising foundations to compensate for the natural incline of the rear garden. By disregarding this, the present building works have caused great anxiety to the Fitzgerald family, as any site visit can testify to the imposing and starkly dominant nature of the building at present. What was originally a fairly straightforward planning application by a neighbour has turned into what can only be described as a nightmare for Gordon, Donna, Dylan and Jack Fitzgerald at 2A Cathedral View. Number 10 Farley Road also disregarded the requirement to preserve the numerous mature trees in the garden, having them felled. As a pathetic token of restitution, a few quite pitiable striplings have been planted, which, if they survive, will take decades to replace what was wantonly felled. An attempt to allay Gordon and Donna's deep concerns about their privacy when number 10 Farley has been occupied has been a requirement to place opaque screening around potential vantage points overlooking properties on Cathedral View. Councillors, this would be like putting lipstick on a pig. Gordon and Donna have had their voice tonight through their legal representation. I'd like to speak on behalf of their two sons, Dylan and Jack. I met them recently and asked them both what they felt about this nightmare. Jack said, "I'm now right in the middle of my GCSE exams. This is a stressful time for me and my results are crucial to my future. The building of this house and the family stress has made everything so much harder for me. My plan is to go on to sixth form and study A-levels, so I need to know that the problems with the house bill will stop and come to an end to let me get on with future study without any outside stresses." I'm sure we'd all like to wish Jack every success in his GCSE exams. He's with us here tonight. Thank you, Jack. Dylan said, "I'm very sporty and spend a lot of time in our garden practicing sports. I feel that I will now be watched all the time and this makes me very nervous. All the privacy I had is gone and I don't feel safe anymore. I think it'll be worse when we have things like family barbecues. People will be able to look down on us during our family time." Chair, councillors, I know that the spirit of government guidelines on planning puts great weight on mediation and negotiation to resolve disputes. But when applicants don't play their part, when they don't follow plans as stipulated, when they fail to rectify the crazy tree felling by replanting with mature trees, it falls to you as a committee to send a message that this will not be tolerated. I look forward to a thorough debate and a wise outcome in refusing this application.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelgrave. Julia, would you like to come back on anything that Ms Chapman said?
Just a few points. Obviously, the objections are correct that the original scheme didn't include the raised finished floor levels, and that is made clear in the report. So that is something that councillors are looking at, whether it's acceptable or not to have the raised floor levels. Only to say that we've obviously tried to work with the applicant to try and address the overlooking issues. So the openings that you can currently see on the photo before you, the majority now will be either obscurely glazed or screened by the proposed panelling around the central terrace. The terrace has been moved away sort of 5 metres from either boundary to again try and reduce the massing. And it does include central steps now, as we've asked the applicant to remove the banked levels that were around it before. So there will be some views down the garden area within their own garden, but we feel that obviously the views across to neighbours' gardens should be screened by the panelling either side. I think that's about it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Julia. Members of the committee, Councillor Arwood.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether you can hear me or not. I'll start again. Thank you, Chair. I've got great misgivings regarding this application. I was on the committee in 2015. I think 2 others were on at the same time. And I can remember this application and I've seen fit to look at it again. And I'm considerably perturbed about what's gone on regarding this build. Not only is the footprint, to my mind, considerably more than what's on the original application, so is the height, and that causes me great concern. The terrace, as been pointed out, wasn't on the original application, but it appears to have been put in place without it getting the go-ahead from this committee, and that's another point I'm very disappointed on. The trees were in place, but I understand they've been taken out without authority, and I agree with Councillor Hazelgrave. The ones that have been put in to replace will take many, many years to go to a height, which makes this particular property basically wide open. And quite honestly, in my opinion, it's ugly, It's in appearance, and it's intolerable for the people living close to it. The other thing that disappoints me, despite the fact that we had a site visit, work has carried on regardless, even seemingly without authority. And quite honestly, at the end of the day, in my opinion, they had no right to do this. And in my opinion, it should have been stopped until it came before this committee again. I went up there a few days ago, and there appeared to be quite a bit of activity there. I'm not saying they were working, but nevertheless, there was activity, and I don't think that should be taking place. It's said that it's tolerable. I don't think it's tolerable. I think it's intolerable. And I certainly will not be voting for this, and I'm really, really against this application. It seems to me that people think that they can do things and get away with it, and perhaps in the past some have. But sorry, not for me. I'll be voting against this because I don't think it's right. I don't think it's acceptable. And quite honestly, I'm staggered at what's gone on at this particular application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Anybody else? Okay. Councillor West.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose just to reiterate a lot of the things that Councillor Harwood's already said, there are several conditions that could have been applied to this, or that were applied to this before I joined the committee. And I find it really disappointing that the applicants have gone ahead and ignored the conditions that this committee saw fit to impose. And also to agree with Frank that I don't think it's right that the work should have continued while this was pending, while permission hadn't been granted and they were going against what had been granted. Again, like I say, I do appreciate that, you know, trees could be put in, but it's going to be a long time before the trees that are put in would replace what was there originally. And I'm not sure how many years it would take to hide that high level extension. I'm afraid that I'm going to have to agree. I'm not afraid that I have to agree with Frank, but I am going to have to agree with Frank. I don't think I can support this this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Clark's got something to tell us.
Just very briefly, I think as members will know, we can't punish a developer for doing unauthorised work. Yes, they shouldn't do it. In this case, they have been advised that they're doing it at their own risk, because they might not get planning permission for what you've done. And if you go too far, it could be costly. So it's at their risk of the owner. The trees that have been removed, the trees were to be retained on the approved plans. So, and they were the plans that were approved, so the trees are to be retained. They took all the trees out. They weren't TPO trees like the ones at the Cavendish, but they were quite sizable trees which they took out. I've no idea why, but it's now bare, and quite rightly they're replacement trees. If you're ever going to see them above the fence, you'll be lucky. I would also add that if we all want closure on this, I suspect the problems won't stop here without wishing to prejudge what committee you're going to do, because this could be a long, drawn-out saga. Chair, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. Well, the recommendation is in front of you. If nobody else has got anything to say, then we'll take a vote on it. All those in favour of the recommendation, which is to grant? No. All those who are against the recommendation? Fine. Can we have somebody for a proposal for an alternative?
Chair, if it helps, I mean, obviously, because it wasn't granted, it doesn't reflect the previous permission, isn't the reason for granting. But picking up from what the solicitor was saying when she did a presentation, she mentioned, I think, hopefully I'll quote her reasonably correctly, she was saying that the development significantly impacts on the outlook and enjoyment of the neighbouring properties as one reason. It also impacts on the privacy as well. And in particular on the terrace, she was saying that it was oppressive and exacerbates the loss and outlook. She was also mentioning about it sort of has an enclosure feel to it as well. So is that sort of reflective of what committee feel are the principal objections to this and concerns?
Councillor Harwood.
Chair, in May 2015, this committee passed an application for a build on this site. In my opinion, that's the only build that is acceptable to me on this site. It was passed, and therefore they must go back to the original, and that's the only way in which it is acceptable.
We're not here to discuss the last application, it's this one, and obviously you've spoken your mind, so we will need somebody to, defend it when it comes.
Sorry, Chair, I think we need a vote now on the reasons for refusal that you've just divided. And seconded.
Okay.
It's been proposed.
All right. Okay, then the proposal as Stephen has put it, and those of you agree with that? Okay. Yeah. Can we have a volunteer to speak on it? Councillor Harwood.
Chair, we've refused the application because I suspect there will be an appeal. When the appeal comes in, Councillor Harwood's going to do the appeal. As it's already built, I think it's prudent upon us to, at least the committee, to authorise me to take enforcement action to seek removal of the unauthorised building.
Just to comment on that, when we do authorise enforcement, it's always subject to my director being satisfied with the evidence, if that's the proposal. Chair, I don't know if you want to take a vote on that. And everybody agree with what Stephen said? Okay. Fine. I think everybody knows by now that this application is refused. Right, moving on to item 8, potential future site visits.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3. First one is 30 to 31 Fragate. This is a change of use. It's the retention of the retail use on the ground floor with A2 and A3 uses with residential units on the upper floors, with 8 flats effectively on upper floors. I question whether you would want to do a site visit. You can do your own site visit if you wish. It's not necessary to go in the property. Yes, yes. The next one, Rolls-Royce Marine on Rainsway. This is within the site. Now it's for an extension to their primary components factory, which is a B2 use. Additional car parking, it's all within the site, whether you'd want to go. There's usually a lot of objections to this on other grounds. On other grounds, and equally there's a lot of security measures that you have to get through to get into the site.
It is towards the front of the site, so you get some views from Rainsway. So.
Yeah. Okay, and the next one. the former Ram Arena on Rainsway. This is for the demolition of the sports hall building that's there and change of use of that vacant then open land for a open storage use, B8 storage, I suspect, and the application says it's going to be storage containers. Now, again, you could probably see this from the public domain without needing to go onto the site. Okay.
That's it.
Those are the three. Thank you, Chair.